One Night at the Opera. Chapter 9. And what happened next cannot be described in a fairy tale or with a pen. The next to appear on stage were 3 snake women. I had already seen one of them earlier, during a strange tea party. The others, for the first time. They were holding magic wands in their hands, and skillfully wielded them, blowing huge soap bubbles. The bubbles flew around the hall, and touched all the lamps. They flew and shimmered in different colors, without bursting until the very last moment. This soap show alone was very beautiful. It could have been contemplated for a long time in itself. But the purpose of these bubbles was specific, magical, and not at all to amuse the audience. They burst, colliding with wall candles' candelabra, and each candelabra from this collision turned into a water tap. The tap was beautiful, with curls and patterns all over the pipe, completely in the opera style. It opened immediately, and water began to pour out of it. "What's going on?" Nivara screamed, delighted and perplexed. "Are we getting wet? Has the opera decided to get completely wet?" I screamed too, not understanding why this was happening. But the hall had already begun to fill with water, and it was rising much faster than one might have expected. To complete the transformation, the chandelier turned into one continuous waterfall, and then the influx of water became truly terrifyingly fast. Less than 5 minutes had passed, and the hall was half filled. The water now reached the second balcony out of 6. Well, maybe it's not exactly half the height, but still, a lot. And the most interesting thing is that the taps did not simply close after that. They turned back into lamps, and the light of the candles began to burn even under the water. Have you ever seen how a flame burns under water? How does an ordinary, extraordinary magic candle burn, immersed in extraordinary magic water? Its flame releases petals and becomes similar to a lotus flower, each petal swaying separately. It remains like that especially where the candle barely emerges from the water, and only this lotus blazes right above the surface. It is already more difficult to distinguish under the water, but I looked closely. It looks similar. But above the water, the lights, unfortunately, burned in the usual way. The opera was completely soaked, and so were we. We were standing right in the middle of the stage, and there was nowhere to go. And the more the water rose, the more we were understood, along with it. Several chairs got soaked from the general rows of the stalls, and floated on the surface. And we sat on them, and floated on these chairs on top. It turns out so funny and amusing. And now, soaked to the waist, we laughed and did not know what to do in such an unusual water environment. The snake women, for example, felt great in the water. They threw off their dresses, remaining in only their underwear, which lay on them like lace bathing suits. They began to bathe, and the water rose in foam from their tails. The women beat their tail fins, whipping up large soap bubbles on the water. And again, these bubbles often rose into the air and flew up to the ceiling, but this time they did not turn anything into anything else. "Wow!" were the only words I had. "Catch!" Nivara drove a wave at me, and a ball that had floated from somewhere was bobbing on the wave. I caught it and sent it back, and we started something like water volleyball with the snakes. We threw the ball back and forth between ourselves, hitting it high above the waves. But soon we got bored with it, and the snakes decided to improve the ball. They set it on fire with witchcraft, and some strange connection arose between the elements. Or rather, a rejection. The fiery ball did not want to enter the water, but pushed away from it every time it approached. At first I was afraid to catch such a sphere, but the fire turned out to be low temperature. Barely warm, but in no way hot. Maybe it was also because it was constantly cooling down, doused with waves. It is quite possible that this is so. But we hit it this way and that, and now it became even easier to do. Light blows sent the flaming sphere right up to the ceiling, where it met the chandelier, and quickly descended back. But soon we got bored with this activity too. We decided to have a tea party. Still floating on chairs, but replacing ordinary chairs with comfortable rocking chairs, which themselves came to us instead. And one of the snake women made herself comfortable on a sofa that was floating by. Small tea tables appeared and floated. Tea tables because mugs of hot tea and saucers with cakes were placed on them. We began to drink and eat these delicacies, to our heart's content. The water heated up and became pleasantly warm. Probably because it was heated by the candles burning everywhere. And the chandelier was constantly showering golden sparks. Something like shining snow was falling from it, falling in golden flakes. And where these flakes touched the water, they turned into flower petals. And the petals spread out in the water, for some distance, and melted again, turning into nothing. But it looked very beautiful. I noticed a familiar waistcoat rabbit with a watch in the far box, and asked the nearest snake, what time was it already? She did not have an ordinary watch with her, but with a couple of deft movements of her magic wand she created a dial in the air, inscribed with silver lines. It showed 1:15, and I was amazed at how long and slowly time dragged on. The opera performance began at midnight, and since then we had already managed so much, and what happens, only 15 minutes have passed. The snake declared that the solemn and magical time of these adventures was magically dragging on. We had nowhere to hurry, the night would be enough for all the actions of the performance. The water gradually began to subside, but the chairs in the stalls were washed away. They were simply washed away from their seats, and they floated away as far as possible, crowding in the amphitheater and near the first nearby balconies, under them. Now there was a lot of free space in the stalls, and the crowd of chairs was quickly melting, evaporating right before our eyes, so that the whole began to look decent again, and the water had gone somewhere from it. Only now a large free space had formed in the very center. There stood the snake women, all three of them. In each hand was a magic wand, which each of them, with a few swings, turned into a trident. They began to rotate the tridents in their hands, and water splashes and streams formed around this rotation. And then they splashed this water in a powerful wave right at us, trying to hit the heroes. At me and Nivara. But we noticed this intention in time, and each time we managed to dodge to the side, letting the wave pass by. So we continued playing. From somewhere to the side, a giant meter-sized crab appeared. It raised its claws and released a net from them in our direction. She caught the dragonessa's legs from some sea fibers and glued her to the floor. So the snakes were able to douse the girl from head to toe with water again, and for some time she was completely soaked. But I found a way to dry her and protect myself. A candelabrum grabbed from one of the columns became my protection, and the other, the protection of Nivara herself. The candle flame reflected the oncoming wave, cutting it in two, and forcing it to fly left and right, to part. So we reflected the blows of water, and we ourselves shot sparks and balls of flame from the candles at the snake aunts. The game went on until we ran out of tea. And then the snakes left. We were left alone in the middle of the empty stalls, without chairs, sitting only in a couple of remaining rocking chairs, and swaying, looking at the stage, from which streams of water were still slowly flowing down and murmuring with loud splashes.